Hello there, people of the internet. Today we're going to go ahead and talk about the cheapest possible ways that you can defend yourself. Now, before we start on that, YouTube reviewer, I'm sure who is watching this, I'm not advocating any sales here. I'm not telling people where to go out and buy things. I'm just telling people the general market price of what they would come to expect if they look for these sorts of things that we're going to be talking about. So I'm once again making sure that this is in compliance with YouTube's community guidelines, so please don't give me a strike on this video, although I'm sure that somebody out there is going to do it anyway because they've been on top of me lately. So typically whenever it comes to the idea of getting something for self-defense, people want to balance budget with capabilities. And as you go lower and lower in that budget tier, you start to see less and less capability. But there is a Goldilocks area where you have some pretty significant budget options that are still pretty significantly capable. And we'll go ahead and we'll start looking at some of those. So let's go ahead and start off with like extreme budget stuff. Let's say you're out and about and you have under $100. That's all you have to go out and get yourself whatever it is that you're wanting to get. Well, my suggestion to you, there's a few different options. There is your typical Saturday night special handguns that you can find. These were popular, 40 years ago, somewhere around that time period. They were popular because they were extraordinarily cheap, like easy to produce handguns that were brought into the country. The United States did make these no longer available to be brought into the country, but you can find these for under $100 pretty gosh darn easily. These are not things that I would take out and shoot regularly. This right here is a 380 ACP by BRYCO, Bryco, I think that's how that's pronounced. But there's like Lorson, there's Jennings, there's Raven Arms. There's a bunch of different platforms out there that basically made the same exact gun. And these were the Saturday night specials, and they were designed to be extremely cheap handguns for people to go out and get to use for whatever purposes it is that they're wanting to use them for. And this can be found for under $100. I wouldn't bet my life to it, but if it's all you got, then it's all you got. Another good one kind of falls into the same category, High Points. If you go out and do some looking around, you can dig up a used High Point. Typically one of their 380 High Point handguns, probably for under that $100 period, or that $100 mark as well. This right here is a Heritage Rough Rider 22 long rifle, obviously an 1873 lookalike. It's not an exact clone by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a lookalike. And this particular one I picked up used, and I got it for like $89. So you could go out and get yourself a used one of these for about that same price point. There's good options out there. There's options that I wouldn't necessarily trust, and there's actually options that are fairly decent. Where is it at? Aha. Is this it? No, that's not it. Somewhere in this big pile that I have right here, I have a 6.5 Carcano that has been sporterized. It's an M38 6.5 Carcano. If you go out and you start looking for some of these sporterized guns, especially if we're talking about ones that are not very desirable, like your Carcano, however it is you feel like pronouncing that, like your Carcano rifles, then you might be able to pick something up for pretty gosh darn cheap. Like that Carcano rifle I picked up from an old guy that was down at the gun store trying to sell it, and I got it for $60, which is well under that $100 price point. It's just not a very popular platform. I know there's been a couple of different import companies whenever they were first being brought in who were selling them for under $100. I made a full-on video on that, and probably not going to find that nowadays, but it was a thing. It did exist. You could go out and get yourself one of those for $100. Now, although those aren't the greatest of self-defense options, they're definitely better than nothing. I will go ahead and acknowledge that right now. But if we were to increase the price just a little bit from like $100 to $200, I think that we can all manage to swing $200 for some sort of self-defense purpose. That's when you start to see some really good options start to pop up for the amount of money it is that you're actually spending. Like, for example, if you want to go out and get yourself something like this right here, maybe not with the horrible pink paint job on it, but this is from a a previous video that I made a while back. This is a Maverick 88, and these are like a no bells and whistles, very simple, bare bones shotgun that you can go out and find on the used market for under that $200 price point. This one right here, actually, I think I got this for under $100 back whenever I had first gotten it. I think after all is said and done, and after I stuck everything into this to get it up and going, I probably got about $150 into it. But these under that $200 price point are not impossible to find. As a matter of fact, they're not exactly uncommon to find. If you want to go out and get yourself one that is like brand new off the shelf, you're probably looking more at like $250, somewhere in that ballpark. But if you manage to go out and find one of these, like say, I don't know, in your local gun store or pawn shop or something like that, then you might be able to pick one up for under that $200 price point. Now another one, Glock clones. Basically any kind of your police turn-in Glocks or Glock clones, especially if we're talking about ones chambered in 40 Smith & Wesson. Finding something like this right here is not unheard of in terms of under that $200 price point. Like this one right here, this is a Smith & Wesson SW40VE, which is like their value version of a Glock clone in a less desirable cartridge, 40 Smith & Wesson. Back whenever I picked this thing up, it came with 2 magazines, and I paid like $180 for it or something like that. And for a 40 Smith & Wesson that holds 14 rounds of ammunition, in this particular case, I got some Hornady ammunition in here. That amount of money for the capabilities of this handgun, granted this particular handgun was their first model and the rail on the bottom was not a Picatinny rail, so I stuck a Picatinny rail adapter to it so I can mount a light or whatever it is that I feel like to this thing. The capabilities of this handgun for the amount of money that is spent is actually pretty gosh darn significant. These are so similar to a Glock handgun that Glock actually sued Smith & Wesson like many years ago, and they won that lawsuit for patent infringement, I think it was. But for all intents and purposes, you have the same capabilities that you would get with a Glock as you would with something like this, and this is just one of the examples. There's a ton of different Glock clones out there that you can find on the used market for a very small amount of money. On top of that, there's also different used like micro pistols out there, typically chambered in .380. As you start to look more at 9mm, you start to get into the more expensive options, like a little bit beyond that $200 price point, just because it's a more desirable cartridge. But the less desirable ones, like .380 and 40 Smith & Wesson and things like that, you start to see them going for a little bit less. Like for example, I got my Taurus Spectrum, which I've shown off on this channel plenty of times. It's a .380 ACP. It almost looks like a little PPK clone looking thing, but they're not very expensive. They're made by Taurus. I picked that one up used, and I think I paid like $150 for it or something like that. So there's options out there for you. The micro compact handguns, I wouldn't necessarily use that thing as like a general duty pistol. That is definitely more of like a pocket gun than anything else. But if you want to go out and get yourself something on the used market that is more similar to something like this, then you can really begin to look into some pretty gosh darn good options for the amount of money that you're spending. Now if we start looking at the $200 to $300 price point, we have a lot of different things that pop up. I know there's the Taurus handguns, like basically all Taurus handguns fall into that category. And if you get yourself a good one, then they can be quite good guns. I know we have a bunch of different cap and ball revolvers that also fall into that category. You can find them cheaper than $200 if you're picking up a used one, but by a pretty huge margin, your cap and ball revolvers are going to be that $200 to $300 price point, unless you're going with something that is a little bit more pricey, a little bit better made, a little bit more luxury, versus something like, say, a Pieta, or even most of your Uberti models. This right here is an 1851. I know the 1860s are also quite cheap, especially if we're talking about the brass frame models. It's just because they're very easy to produce. They're very simple designs. They're most of the time imported into the country, so there's certain factors that go into keeping costs down on these revolvers. But one of the good things about these is since they're classified as antiques under federal law, you don't have to worry about filling out an FFL paperwork for these in most of the areas in the United States. There are some states where there are certain restrictions where you have to do it anyway, but most of the time you don't got to worry about that. Of course, there's a plethora of modern handguns that you can go out and get for about that price point. Like, for example, this right here is a 357 Magnum EAA Vindicator. I'm not sure if it's Vindicator or Vindicator. It's a German handgun, and they pronounce their W's like V's, so I'm going to go with Vindicator. Whenever I had gotten this thing right here, I paid like 270 bucks for it, and 270 bucks for a 357 Magnum is a pretty gosh darn good deal. I know Rock Island Armory, they make like a 38 special, the model M200. That is the revolver that I'm thinking of. It's a 38 special. I think it's like a 3-inch barrel. Yeah, it's a 38 special 3-inch barrel. We're gonna assume somewhere around that barrel length. It's a revolver that you can pick up for, if I had to make a bet, I'd say probably around that $250 price point if you're gonna go out and buy it new. Pretty gosh darn simple design. It's got the Colt locking system in it, not the Smith & Wesson push forward button, but the Colt pull back button to where you can open your cylinder. That is a pretty gosh darn good option if you want to go out and get yourself something brand spanking new. Like, for the money, it is a good way to go. Between that $200 to $300 price point, you also have like a real large plethora of all sorts of different shotguns that you can go out and get your hands on, along with a good different variety of military surplus stuff or just full power rifles in general. If you want to go with a more modern rifle, like a more modern, say, bolt-action hunting rifle, like your budget tier Savage models or something like that, you can go out and get yourself something along that lines without breaking the bank. As a matter of fact, this particular Savage that I got right here, I think I paid, I don't know, 220 bucks for that particular one. So it is within that price point. I know a lot of my sporterized military surplus guns I got for like below 300 bucks. I would never pay more than 300 bucks for a sporterized mil surp. As a matter of fact, my Lee Enfield, which I have sitting right there under that big pile that I'm not going to bother going for, that one right there, I picked up for like 175. So the sporterized stuff could be got for pretty gosh darn cheap, and they're not exactly incapable firearms. They're not the best by any stretch of the imagination in comparison to what we have nowadays, especially if they've been sporterized, but they're far from incapable. But you definitely have quite a plethora of options when we're looking at that $200 to $300 price point. You know, like, you really start to see some different options open up. Now, if we start looking at 300 bucks to 400 bucks, now you're starting to look at like some really, really good options. Like, at that point, you can go out and find yourself a budget tier AR. I know that this right here is a DTI. These are a little bit more expensive, but I've seen Radicals on sale for like $350. Now it's a bare bones, nothing special AR more often than not even coming with any sights or optics or anything like that, so you'll have to get those accessories as well. They normally just come with one magazine, so you're going to want more magazines. There's no real way to carry those around unless you're going to stick them in a pants pocket or something, so don't do that. Go out and get yourself a bandolier. Like a surplus bandolier can be had for like $8 or something. But at that price point, you can go out and get yourself a probably going to be pretty gosh darn good AR, and that is going to serve your purposes quite well. At $300 to $400, there's also a fair amount of pretty gosh darn capable surplus guns. Like, if I were to pick one off the top of my head, I'd probably say the SKS. Finding one of these out there, especially if it's been like sporterized or modified or something like that, for that $300 to $400 price point, you can do that pretty gosh darn easily. 10 rounds at 7.62 x 39. Do not trust your life to those aftermarket magazines because they make the platform extraordinarily unreliable. This is a really, really, really good option at that price point. The AR is definitely a better option, but if you're bound and determined to, like, say, run a 7.62 x 39, or you want some sort of military surplus rifle that you know is going to be absolutely bomb-proof, SKS is a good way to go. I think as we get beyond that $400 price point, we start to like leave the guise of more budget-oriented handguns or rifles or shotguns or whatever it is that you're looking for. So I think we're going to go ahead and like stop at that $400 price point. I do want to give a couple of shout outs here. I want to talk about single shot shotguns. These right here can be had for like under that $100 price point, especially if you go out and you find it used. Or if you get yourself like a very bare basic, like bare minimum basic single shot of some kind, which they do produce for under $100. You can go out and find them pretty gosh darn easily. These, they could do the job, but I would want something that has a little bit more capacity than a single shot. If you do decide to go the single shot route just because of your own limitations and your own restrictions, your own budgetary restraints or something like that, then maybe get yourself a bandolier or a cartridge belt or something like that to where you can load this thing fairly quickly. I've seen some people load and unload single shot shotguns pretty gosh darn competently, but it takes a lot of practice. And with the amount of money you'd spend in ammo just for practice, like you could have gone out and got yourself at least a Maverick 88 or some other pump gun, which would have been a better option. I also want to shout out the 22 long rifle. Again, you can find yourself a semi-auto 22 long rifle for not a lot of money. This particular one, this is a Savage, oh, I can't remember the actual model designation. Yeah, Savage Model 64. I know that the 62 and the 64 are basically the same gun, and there's a huge variety of different 22 long rifle, like 22 long rifle semi-automatics like this right here that are basically the same model, that do the same exact thing. There's a lot of these out there. This is nothing special. It's nothing revolutionary. Like I said, this one right here I picked up for under $100 not too terribly long ago. As a matter of fact, I think I picked this up for like $80, and that was online after shipping and things like that, if memory serves me correctly. But 22 long rifle, although it could get the job done, I wouldn't necessarily trust it to immediately stop a threat, and I wouldn't necessarily trust it with a variety of things that I do on a pretty gosh darn normal basis. I need something that's going to put down whatever it is that I am shooting at, like, as quickly as possible, and this probably couldn't do it. But if you are in the market for something like this, I know I brought up the handgun, at least the handgun is concealable, like the Heritage Rough Rider, versus something like this, which would be kept in a closet or maybe in the trunk of a car or something like that. It's just going to be not as good of an option. I would definitely go with the 22 long rifle handgun if I was going to go the 22 long rifle route. So those are my little honorable mentions there. Thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. This video is going a little long. I'm going to go and end it here. I guess I'll see you guys in the next episode. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.